From CRI Simple Numbers, this is Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, a podcast for those who champion market growth and anchor the nation's economy, small businesses, and entrepreneurs.
Hey everyone, welcome. This is Simple Numbers Profitability Playbook Podcast. I got myself, Mike Maxson, with Brandon Gray, and of course, Greg Crabtree. So we're going to be talking about labor efficiency. This is probably going to be broken into three parts. We're going to touch on the topic of overall labor efficiency today, and then get down into labor efficiency of your direct and management teams. For those of you who don't know, this was a concept introduced by Greg in Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, and really looking at measuring your labor against gross margin dollars and how we do that here at Simple Numbers. So, Greg, kick it off. Give the intro to where this came from and what we're looking at.
So as we started developing our concepts for Simple Numbers, it really kind of started with just doing some data analysis. And, it really goes back to a client of mine that was a government contractor. And we had this interesting discussion about his financials one time. And he was doing $18 million of revenue. And, I was looking at his profitability is about 2%. And I said, listen, this is not good. I mean, back then I didn't have my guidelines of, what appropriate was, but I just knew it wasn't enough. And I said, you got to be more than 2% profitable. And he says, you don't understand. I'm not an $18 million business. I go, what? He says, no, I have to subcontract out to an 8A contractor, 51% of what we do. So we're the 49% and they're the 51%, on the contract. It says, I'm really a $9 million business. I go, oh, he's right. And it got me to thinking about this idea of what real revenue was. And so I quickly did the math and I said, okay, so that means you're at 4% profit, which is still not good, but at least we got the process going. So as he planted that seed in my head, I go, man, what if I start categorizing all of our clients' data that has materials and subcontractors as pass-throughs and get to a redefined gross margin. So instead of the traditional gross margin that people might put labor in, it kind of seeded an idea in my head of saying, really gross margin is the true economic top line of business. And then we measure labor efficiency against that number. Now, when I wrote the first book, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, we had not really done a lot of research at that time. This was about 2009 of the targets for direct labor efficiency and management labor efficiency. And in reality, looking at those subcomponents, those kind of vary both by industry and by labor strategy. But what has become overwhelmingly important is, listen, I don't care if they're direct labor, I don't care if it's management labor, I don't care if it's somebody taking out the trash. For 90% of the businesses that exist in a developed world economy, U.S., Australia, Canada are the three economies we see a lot of data on. It's a 2. I need $2 of gross margin for every dollar of labor. It's going to range between 1.9 and 2.1. That's how short of a distance from beginning to end it is. And it's just phenomenal that, that one metric has been hiding in plain sight, forever. And the thing is you can go back 20 years and calculate that number. And for an appropriately profitable business, it's a 2. You can go back 40 years. It's a 2. Now, there's been technology, there's been productivity enhancements, but the marketplace demands a price to be charged for the value of that labor input. In every value, it's kind of the concept of value add. Labor is a value add. If you have to deploy labor in any economic activity, it's value being added to the thing, to the product and or service, that you're doing. and there's an appropriate multiplier that the market gravitates to. Well, why is it a 2? Well, it comes back to this. It has to be a 2 to get you the appropriate return on invested capital of profit relative to capital invested, which, oh, by the way, gets you back to a profit targeting mechanism that I've now kind of gravitated to more so now than in the beginning, of looking at profit relative to gross margin. And so we've probably talked on this in some of the other podcasts, or will in the future, but I don't look at profit to revenue, because that can even be crazy within the same industry. What is consistent across almost all businesses is I need a minimum 15% profit to gross margin. My target should be 20%. I'm at a stretch goal at about 25. If I'm above 25, hey, you're doing something really good. Try to hold on to it as long as you can. The market will generally compete you back, to that number. And so that 2, if you think of a triangulation, I'm trying to accomplish a trifecta of 3 data points. I need a 2 total LER. I need a 20% or higher profit to gross margin. And I need a 50% or higher return on invested capital. And that all you're trying to do is get those 3 things into alignment. But what you'll find is, if I get to a 2, the other 2 kind of come into alignment, unless the only time return on invested capital doesn't come into alignment is I'm not effectively managing my capital deployed. I'm giving too generous terms for AR. I'm not managing inventory correctly. I'm getting no support from my vendors. I don't try to get any deferred revenue by getting my clients to pay me a deposit or pay in advance and those kind of things. And so generally in the world of simple numbers, we're completing this trifecta of getting, I'm getting margin per labor dollar being spent is the underpinning of the economic engine of the business. But the right number tells me I hit my right profit targets, which tells me I hit my right return on investment target. And when all those things come into alignment, you're running a boss of the business.
Awesome stuff. Hey, I got a couple questions. Brandon, help me out here, because these are questions we get a lot, and I actually know the answer, but I'm going to let you deliver it here for me. We talk about labor efficiency getting the gross margin, right? Revenue less non-labor COGS gets you your gross margin, then divided by your direct labor gets you that labor efficiency number. But tell me, in terms of subcontractors, because we have clients out there that are sub heavy, some that don't use subs at all. And one of the questions I get is, hey, do I ever count my subs in indirect labor? Is my direct labor or in that labor pool that you would hold accountable to gross margin? Could you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you kind of look at the relationship, it many times kind of drives how you're going to determine where you put those from a costing perspective, and then the impact it's going to have on labor efficiency. So here's what I mean by that. The term sub is pretty broad. So you could have a sub that is a full company in and of itself. They're deploying their own labor. You don't have any control over what's taking place other than a deliverable or a milestone or something like that. In those cases, most of the time we would put those in cost of goods sold. There's also a relationship folks have with subs to where maybe I kind of use the term sometimes like hired gun, or you're in an industry to where you're using a lot of subs, but they're more like an employee-employer type of relationship. It's not a separate company in and of itself. It's one person that you're subbing this activity to. In many ways, very similar to what an employee would look like from that standpoint. You can have somewhat control over to some degree. Now, once again, there are some guidelines around if you're a subcontractor or an employee. We're not going to get into that from an IRS perspective. But that being said, you have a little bit more control over that labor. In those cases, we're going to put them in direct labor. You look at that concept around leveraging of labor. And so if I got some control over it, I can leverage it a little bit differently. Also, whenever they're a standalone company, in that rate that you're paying them is baked in overhead costs and other things like that that aren't necessarily as present, if they are present at all, whenever it's just more of that hired gun kind of relationship. So, depending upon how they're treated and how you work with them, many times will drive where you put them from that perspective. But in either case, like Greg was saying, the key is you got to be able to leverage that labor. And when you boil it down inside of a business, there's just not a lot of costs that you have a lot of control over other than labor. I think Greg has said it, it's the only cost that shows up every day with an attitude. And so the good news is that you can manage that from that standpoint. You can deploy it appropriately to get a return. A lot of times when we're working with clients too, they know they have a profit issue, or they were running at a certain level of profitability, and the landscape changes, and they're like, oh no, I'm gonna have a profit issue. And the first place they go is trying to cut out overhead expenses that aren't labor related. And you can work night and day on that, but have you ever tried to negotiate with the utility company? Have you ever went around the office and turned off all the lights? Well, you're just not going to save. There's just, in most cases, not enough meat on that bone. And so you get back to, well, what's the one number that I can impact the most? And that is going to be the management of your labor. So,
And what you find in today, I had a discussion today with a marketing client we worked with for a lot of years, and they use freelance labor that we treat as a cost of goods sold to get to gross margin as a buffer. And so when they don't have the staff to do things, they got to go freelance. Well, they pay an extra rate for that freelance
Premium.
labor
Yeah.
because you have to leave profit in the equation for that freelancer, to being a freelance and an as on demand resource versus a committed resource. And so we monitor that number. And so when we see that their spending for freelancers gets to a certain level, and it stays at that level, that's telling you that you have enough room to bring on committed labor that in their case historically has been about half the cost of the internal resource versus what a freelancer on demand is. And so our rule of thumb for them has always been, when I can have an internal resource that is at 50% utilization, that's when I want to hire it internally. If I don't have at least 50% consistent utilization of that resource, I'm going to use a freelancer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. And one thing I like too about the overall labor efficiency number, especially with a few clients I had that are in some serious growth mode, when we get into direct and management labor efficiency, there's some targets you can look at, but you're going to leverage those different labor buckets at different times. Hey, I might be investing more in direct labor at one point. I might be investing more in management labor at one point. And and they get all worried and panicked, and I'm out of whack, and I'm not even close to what our target is. And it's like, well, no. If you see down here, you've actually been able to hold your management labor bucket steady, and that's where that overall labor efficiency comes in. It allows you, just like Greg said, is hey, I technically don't care what it is when it comes to just getting your profit target, because that's what that overall number. And Brandon, excuse me, if you could, because listen, we're going to hear it. Everyone's different. Everyone, is unique. And they want to see what this trend is. How do they, hey, what is my overall labor efficiency trend been? What is my actual target? Greg says it's a 2, but I don't know. Or Greg says it's 1.9. I don't know. How would they go about seeing, getting that trend number?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, every business is unique and every business is a little bit different, but we're yet to run across a business that doesn't require the leveraging of labor. And so there is some universal application from that standpoint. So that being said, then one exercise that I like is, well, first let's calculate your labor efficiency ratio. So gross margin, which is revenue less your non-labor direct cost, okay, divided by total labor gives you the LER. So pretty simple calculation. So if you can take your data, we prefer to look at it on what we refer to in simple numbers as a rolling 12. And we've got plenty of information. Go to the website. You'll see templates and everything else on how to get your data into a rolling 12, which is basically looking at 12 months of time in each column of data for each representing each month. We like that because it takes out some of the anomalies, the ups and the downs, especially if you have a seasonal business and what have you there. So if you're looking at that rolling 12, we want to look at 2 data points. So the first is we want to look at, when were you the most profitable? When were you the most efficient? And as Greg said, if you're looking at that percentage of gross margin, when was that profit the highest? Okay. So that's the first thing you're going to kind of start to look at. And you identify on that rolling 12. Oh, it was a year ago, for example. Okay. Now let's look at what that LER is. I would bet you a steak dinner that those two numbers run in harmony together. The higher the profit, the higher the LER. Now there might be some cases to where, hey, I dumped a ton of money into marketing in one rolling 12 period, it wasn't present in another, and that kind of skewed it. But those are pretty rare. So that's the first thing I'm going to look at. Is I want to look at as much data across time. I might look at 12, 10, 12, 15, 20 rolling 12 periods and identify where was I at my peak. And in most of the time, you kind of can see, the data tells a story of, it was really high. You see it start to come down, profit goes down, and you can look back, and then the story most of the time is, oh, that's whenever I brought on executive labor. That's when I might have added to my team. I brought on a new salesperson, or, we added another shift to our manufacturing environment, whatever it may be. And you see it come down, and then you see it come up. Well, what happened? That labor that you added then starts to become efficient. So you start growing gross margin dollars because you added that labor, and it comes up. So I like the approach. A lot of times we'll show clients of, hey, this is a good target for you because this is when you were doing your best. And let's start off by hitting that again. What did your company look like at that point in time?
Now, the only outliers on the high and the low side that you see, you're going to see a lower than a 2 LER on a staffing business. And that is as you're counting, if I count the people that I'm contracting out as staff, you're contracting them out at a margin that's not that managed multiplier rate. So typically a staffing business is going to be somewhere between a 1.5 and a 1.7, depending on how unique the staffing is. On the high, that's the only one on the low side, though. I'll give you an example that's similar. Think of it like this: if you run a commercial cleaning business, your target total LER is about a 1.6 to 1.7, because it doesn't take any expertise to clean a toilet. I mean, a commercial cleaning business is a staffing business in reality. So you have to think in those terms. On the high side, I've really got 3. One is retail is about a 2.5, and you're just a different model in terms of you've got kind of an extra operating expense as a retail fixed location, and so that's the reason why labor has to get a higher lever, and so that's the only reason for it to exist. Secondly, a distributor. And so if you are, a distributor, that one, and this is assuming, very importantly, that the owner who is included in those total wages is taking a wage at a market-based wage. Now, we see some crazy LER numbers, but it's because the owner's playing salary games. So this is the owner at a market-based wage. But the third one is a union shop. And so we have a lot of clients in the trades that are union shops. They need to be a 2.5. So an HVAC company that's non-union needs to have a total LER of 2. An HVAC company that is union needs to be a 2.5. So right there, it tells you the impact of being a union shop.
And I'll give you guys one more kind of thought. And Mike, I might be getting ahead of you here, but this is one of the most powerful metrics that you can look at in real time. So another thing a lot of our clients talk about is, hey, I don't get my numbers till the end of the month, or at best case, it's middle of the next month. And as Greg would say, by then the cow's left the barn. I find out 6 weeks later, I've got a labor issue. Well, guess what? Every time you run payroll, you can look at labor efficiency. And if you know what your target is, every payroll cycle, if I am on target, a past target, or if I'm behind target. And this is one of those cases to where perfect's the enemy of finished.
So when you look at that, so you've got the example of, like, when I teach my EO Accelerator classes. If I can know margin by week, then the nirvana of LER is what you're talking about. I have a manufacturing client that they know they sell product every week. This is a large client. And I said, listen, guys, here's the only number you need to know. 2, your salespeople need to sell $2 of gross margin every week for every dollar of payroll that's on payroll that week. And that's it. You're perfect. If you're above it, great. If you're below it, you better make it up in the next week or two. You know,
Right.
but that's
Well,
it.
that report I used to run for us, I say back in the day in the Crabtree, Rowe, and Burger days. But what we did to those listening was we had payroll every 2 weeks. In the 2 week cycle, we would say, hey, here's how many hours were worked and the estimated billing from those billable hours. So 20,000, whatever. And then you just the realization rate, 80%. Take that against payroll, and next thing you know, you got a
Good idea. Really good idea.
So now on the other side, so what if you can't measure margin on a weekly or biweekly basis very easily? Okay, here's your other option. So I was teaching an accelerator class up in Connecticut, for a group, and this young marketing business was there, and I said, okay, well here's she's struggling with the concept. And I said, listen, we got to get you profitable with what you got. I mean, that's the mantra. If you can't be profitable with what you got, why do you think you're going to get profitable if you get bigger? That's not going to happen. So here's the deal. Do you know how I was there in September, and I said, can you estimate how much you're going to pay in payroll for the month of October? Oh yeah, I know that. Great. So let's say it's $50,000. So it's perfect. You know what your billing target is for October? 100,000. This isn't complex math, folks. And she looked at me like a calf looking at a new gate, going, "Huh? Yeah. I mean, you got $50,000 of payroll. Can that group produce $100,000 of billing?" So that presumes a couple of things. Number one is, have you sold $100,000 worth of work that you're supposed to do that month? So that's step one. If you hadn't sold it, okay, you gotta.
You're not gonna do it.
So let's just say, so in her case, she actually has sold it, but here's what she said her problem was. Oh, well, we've sold it, but we still got to finish up work on things that we've already billed for. Okay, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the previous month's revenue. So what you've got to do is stop letting stuff you've already recognized the income for bleed into your current capacity. And like I said, you've got to make sure you go earn that billing for this month's payroll. And I said, hey, you're going to have to burn the candle at both ends until you get caught up. But you've got to go produce $100,000 of new revenue this month and get paid for it for that $50,000 in labor, or else you are not going to succeed as a business.
Hey, Brandon, if you could too, speak to some of the, we just did it a little bit there with you bringing it up, and the sort of the flexibility of that number. Hey, we could run it every time we run payroll, but tell a little bit about some of the granularity that can be done with labor efficiency, whether that's cross division, client, things like that will allow us to get more visibility into it.
The more detailed you can track it, the better decisions you can make. And like we said, we're starting high level here. And as we talk about in the next couple podcasts, we're going to go into the different areas: direct LER, management LER, marketing LER, sales LER. I mean, there's 1,000 ways you kind of can start to slice and dice it if you have the ability to track it. Excuse me. But if you're a multiple location, a multiple location business, then okay, I want to look at LER as not just company wide. I want to start to look at each location. Why is one location's much higher than another's? If I can look at it by division or by segment of my business, maybe you have a business that has different teams that have different output and different things they do. I want to look at it by team. In some cases, if you can track it, you can start to look at it by customer, client, or contract. And the more detailed you start getting that, you get all the data to know, okay, what have I got to shift and change? So I've either got to, if I am efficient and I'm still not hitting LER target, then I'm either paying people too much, which is rarely the case, or I'm not charging enough, which we many times see.
And this is kind of the subtlety of why we created LER, because you can, all I did was I flipped the formula to make, instead of labor as labor is the numerator and revenue or gross margin is the denominator. and give you a percentage. Well, a percentage is a reductive mindset.
Yep.
And I wanted to think about a productive mindset. So labor, a dollar of labor is your input. And so it's always in any LER calculation, labor is always the denominator. For those of you that are fractions challenged, the denominator is the bottom number of the fraction and the numerator is the top number of the fraction. So I just want to remind everybody what that is. And so you can come up with any LER that I take whatever total labor, a piece of labor, a person's labor, that's my denominator. And then you say, well, what am I holding them accountable to? That's the numerator. Now, we like gross margin of whatever they're held accountable to is best, but sometimes there's not any cost. It is
right.
in our services world, that's just the revenue number because there's not really a COGS for what we do. And so we can actually we know LER by person, we know LER by team, we know LER by customer, and we know LER, by office. And now the thing, I'll give you a good example. I was working with a government contractor as a software developer, and they were struggling. Their LER was awful. And so we dug into it, and I knew their LER. First, we looked at LER by contract. Okay, well, we modeled out and say, well, we got to get you to a 2. And so once we had it by contract, we said, well, which contracts are above a 2 and which contracts are below a 2? And they had some that are above and some that are below. It's just okay. We got some good patterns. Let's work on the bad patterns. So we dug into that contract of the bad pattern, and we looked at LER by person. And lo and behold, we're not charging for this person who's on that contract. Really? And why not? We thought we'd just you can't just throw it in. I mean, this is economic inviolability, and so, and then when they started to see, well, why is this employee a 2.75 LER and this person's a 2.3? They didn't have an answer. Well, why aren't we getting the same rate on everybody? And it was amazing, and I'll give them credit. I mean, they really worked hard over a 6-month period. They really got every contract above the target LER, in that process. But it was just because they were blind to it because they didn't have something to aim at. It gave them, what viability looked like.
Well, I'm glad you touched on that though, because I'm sitting here thinking, because I have some clients that, they probably have the right labor group there, but there's something else going on that might be pushing it lower. And just like you mentioned, we could be off on pricing. We could have bad contracts. We could have vendor costs that are going up that we're not passing it through properly. So labor efficiency isn't just, hey, I'm measuring just labor and it's labor's fault, as much as it can be an indicator of a problem.
It starts the discussion. Because that it makes them dig in and say, why? Why is that? And can we do something about it?
I had a client with a multi-year contract that was inked in 2019. Yeah.
It's called a relic.
With no escalation clause in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were actually paying to finish the work the last 2 years. That contract rolled off and labor efficiency skyrocketed. Yeah. So they learned a lesson. Mm-hmm. Guess what? The next one isn't written that way.
Yeah. I was in a meeting with a group of MSPs yesterday, and it was funny. The same topic came up about multi-year contracts. And it's like, 4 years ago, people thought, a 3-year multi-year contract was golden. And I go, not anymore.
No,
I even want a kick-out clause on a 1-year contract.
Yeah.
Hey, if our MSP clients are listening to this, I work with a lot of you. Me on there saying about the multi-year contracts and price increases. You got to keep them in there, and that's for everybody. It's not just MSPs.
Well, I mean, gone are the day of, you can't also, I got a CPI in there. Have you ever looked at the accuracy of CPI lately? I don't think it's a valid measure of what. If you're a labor-oriented business, right. I got news for you. Especially technical labor is going up at a far more significant rate than CPI is measured.
Yep.
And it will continue.
And real quick, just to just to put this to bed, and we'll sign off here until the next one. But real quick update on the labor efficiency of our 100 company model. We talk about that often and everything, and how is that looking right now across that landscape? Just a quick update.
So what's really interesting, the overall model is about a 1.85. Okay, so that's on the 1 billion of revenue. But what's more significant is you take it, and we've now started splitting it between the companies that are up and the companies that are down. And so this is through November of 23. So about 70% of that 1 billion of revenue is up year over year at slightly under a 10% increase rate. And I will tell you that almost all of that is price increases. It's not really a lot of output increase, but still, it's an increase in revenue. But the group that's up, guess what their total LER is? Anybody want to venture to guess? Bueller? 2.02. The group that's down, the 30% of the about 300 plus million of revenue that's down, their total labor efficiency rate's 1.74. And their profitability is less than half of what it was 2 years ago. And so once again, you can't have a discussion about the economy and make a general statement about the overall economy, because there's a group that's stable and accelerating, and there's a group that is dying. Yes. And is going to we're going to be surprised at the businesses that will become unviable just because what the price they have to charge is just a bridge too far for the customer to pay.
Okay, so all right, I'm going to keep it going. So real quick. So what are some plays they can make on that labor side? Besides just
I think it goes back to what we said. Our mantra is get profitable what you got. Well, you got to look at what will the market give me in consistent demand, and I have to craft a business that can survive. So once again, I can't just I'm going to grow at 20% this year. No, you're not, because the market ain't going to give you that, and there's just not enough of those people. But it might be a nice, stable, consistent, viable business. It just doesn't have any growth opportunities. That's not necessarily horrible. I mean, can you be profitable within that niche? And so, but that's the key. But there's going to be some businesses, and I'll give you a good example. I'm really concerned about retail. Retail is facing the greatest challenge of viability that we've ever seen, because if you're selling a product that can be bought through another channel, at Amazon or just direct to online, you're losing consistent demand. And there'll be demand around hot holidays or those things, but you don't get enough consistent flow or margin, because that labor that it takes to staff a store, everybody notices just how skinny the staffing is of every fixed establishment that you walk into these days. And all it takes is a week or two of bad demand, and all of a sudden you're losing money, and you just don't have enough staying power to get through it. And I really am concerned that unless you're a retail store that has control of the product and they have to come to you to get it, those are the only ones. And you still have to deliver a product that the marketplace wants and have a solid supply chain. But I think common retail is in a world of hurt right now. And I've looked at, like if you walk into a Walgreens or a CVS, there's like 2 people in the whole store working the whole store. And these are not small stores.
Maybe.
Yeah. And the shelves are half empty. And so it's like, this is a sign that we are going to see finally. This has been talked about for years, but I think we're finally in a reshaping of what retail is going to be for the future. And it's not going to be that convenient if you need it now. It will be can you wait for Amazon to deliver it? And that may not necessarily be good or bad. I don't know. I mean, you got to say, is that good or bad? I don't know.
Depends. I got 2 right by my house, so it comes in like 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, if Amazon has it.
Yeah. Way to end on a hot take. Brandon, you got anything else for the group?
Like I said, I just think the key is track it. When were you doing your best? What was that point in time? Set your targeting around it. Be proactive and use it more than just on a month-end basis. And we'll get a little more granular. There's a lot more to come. We have just touched the surface of labor efficiency. So the next couple podcasts will be really good.
Yeah, we'll hit your direct labor staff next, and followed by the management after that one. So should be some good stuff.
Great.
All right, Greg, Brandon, thank you very much.
See y'all.
Everyone take care. Bye.
If you want to know more about driving sustainable profitability for your business, or are interested in learning more about CRI Simple Numbers, please visit our website at simplenumberscri.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast. You can subscribe to Profitability Playbook on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. The views expressed on Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, are those of the presenter and moderator and do not necessarily reflect the views of CRI Simple Numbers or the CRI family of companies. This podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional advice received directly. Consult with your CRI Simple Numbers advisor or another trusted professional if you have questions about your specific situation.